Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a crime that did way more than just dominate the headlines. It scarred an entire generation and, believe it or not, permanently changed the American legal landscape. People started calling it the crime of the century, and that name really stuck, and for good reason. I mean, this wasn't just any crime. It felt like an attack on America's biggest hero and his family. It was just so unthinkable that the press grabbed onto that title, and it's been known as that ever since.
So to really get why this one case had such a massive impact, you have to understand just how famous this family was. We're talking about the Lindberghs. And they weren't just celebrities, oh no. They were basically American royalty. All right, so let's set the scene here. The year is 1932. The whole country is deep in the Great Depression, and people are desperate for heroes. And they absolutely had one, and Charles Lindbergh.
You see, Charles Lindbergh wasn't just a pilot. He was a global icon, a total symbol of American courage and new ideas. His wife, Morrow Lindbergh, she was a celebrated author herself from a really well-known family. And their little boy, Charles Jr., was basically the nation's darling. So you have to keep all of that in mind because it's the key to understanding why what happened on March 1st sent these insane shockwaves across the entire world.
Okay, so now let's go to the crime scene. What investigators found there was, well, not much. Just a few really puzzling clues. And this was the starting point for what would become one of the biggest manhunts in American history.
So picture this. Their quiet, secluded home in Hopewell, New Jersey. The unthinkable happens. While the family is just downstairs, minding their own business, someone climbs up to the second-floor nursery and just disappears with their child. Gone.
The investigators, in the beginning, had almost nothing to work with. There was this really crudely built ladder, some muddy footprints that weren't much help, and a note. That's it. No fingerprints, no witnesses, just this awful, chilling silence where a baby should have been.
That ransom note was a huge piece of evidence. The grammar and spelling were so bad it immediately made them think the kidnapper wasn't a native English speaker. And then there was this weird signature, a strange symbol made of two intersecting circles with 3 holes punched in it. It was like a unique calling card, and it showed up in every single note that got after that.
So now, the whole nation is basically holding its breath. A desperate and honestly really frustrating hunt gets underway. The police, and even the Lindberghs themselves, start communicating with this mysterious figure who only called himself John.
For 2 just agonizing months, they go back and forth with 13 different ransom notes. Then, on April 2nd, they do it. The ransom gets paid in this secret meeting in a cemetery. But all that hope, it just vanished. The child was never returned. And then, on May 12th, a truck driver makes an absolutely horrifying discovery. Just like that, this wasn't a kidnapping case anymore. It was a murder investigation.
This is where some really classic detective work finally breaks the case wide open. You see, the ransom was paid with something called gold certificates. It was a type of money that President Roosevelt was just about to pull out of circulation. So these bills were not only super noticeable, but they were also traceable. For 2 whole years, investigators just patiently followed the money trail every time one of these bills popped up. And the big break? It came from a super alert gas station attendant who just wrote down the license plate of a guy who used one. And that plate led them straight to a German immigrant carpenter named Bruno Richard Hauptmann.
Okay, so the arrest happens, and it sets the stage for what would become one of the most sensational trials in American history. It all went down in this little New Jersey town, but believe me, the entire world was watching as all the evidence against Hauptmann started coming out.
$14,000. That's how much of the ransom money the authorities found just hidden in Bruno Hauptmann's garage. I mean, that was a staggering amount of money back then, and it was a direct physical link to the crime.
So the trial really boiled down to this one central conflict. On one side, you had the prosecution, and they had a mountain of what we'd call circumstantial evidence, the ransom money, handwriting experts linking him to the notes, and maybe the most damning thing of all, wood from his own attic that was a forensic match to a piece of the homemade ladder. But on the other side, Hauptmann's whole defense was this one story, that the money was left behind by a friend who had died. And he just stuck to his guns, denying he had anything to do with it right to the very end.
After what can only be described as a total media circus and some really intense deliberation, the jury came back. Guilty. He was sentenced to death and was executed in 1936. But, and this is a big but, for a lot of people, that verdict didn't really end the questions about this case.
And the impact of this case, it reached so much further than just that courtroom. Yeah, Hauptmann's execution might have looked like the end of the story, but the tragedy of this one little boy would actually go on to permanently change American law and even how we, the public, interact with the media. This is so important. Directly because of this case, Congress passed something called the Federal Kidnapping Act. Everybody just called it the Lindbergh Law. Now, before this, kidnapping was just a local crime. So if a kidnapper crossed a state line, the local police were basically powerless. This new law gave the FBI jurisdiction. It empowered them to take over, and that completely changed how law enforcement could fight this kind of crime across the whole country.
The legacy this case left is just huge. So beyond the legal stuff, it basically created the blueprint for the modern trial by media. You had a beloved hero, a terrible crime, and the new technology of radio and newsreels. It all created this media storm that nobody had ever seen before. It also gave a huge push to forensic science, showing just how powerful things like wood analysis and handwriting analysis could be. And, the story's grip on our imagination, it's never really let go. It's still inspiring books and movies today.
And that really brings us to the question that still hangs over this case, all these decades later. Look, the evidence against Hauptmann was compelling, for sure. But doubts have always lingered about how fair his trial was and whether he really acted alone. So was he the one monster behind it all? Or was he maybe just a convenient suspect, sacrificed because a whole nation was full of grief and outrage? It's that uncertainty, that lingering what-if, that makes the crime of the century one of America's most haunting and debated mysteries, even now,